So this is the same thing as what we did over here, but I want you to also tell it to me in degrees and tell it to me in radian mode. Okay? So let's start with the first one. So as soon as I see rad 3, boom, my brain is thinking 30, 60, 90. So I'm going to draw this, and I know that if this is positive, my triangle automatically is in the first quadrant. Now this represents adjacent, and adjacent is this value and this value. When you go to the right, it's positive. When you go to the left, it's negative. So since this value is positive, I know we're going to be dealing with not only the first quadrant, but the fourth quadrant. Because if you look here, this is the adjacent value, which means that value is rad 3. I know that my hypotenuse is 2, so that is a positive one, but because this is going down, that's a negative 1. Then what I need to do is look at what goes across from my 1. That's 30 degrees, and that is my reference angle. But in my first quadrant, my reference angle is my angle. So boom, I'm done, 30 degrees. Now this one, since it's acting as my reference angle, I need to reference the closest angle. So I go 360 minus 30, which is 330 degrees. Now if you're not sure, you could literally do inverse cosine of rad 3 divided by 2, and it gave you the first value, so you could have cheated in the beginning. But if you're not sure, you can do this. Cosine of 30 degrees, and it's 0.866. Cosine of 330, it's also 0.866. And rad 3 divided by 2 is 0.866. So I know that I'm good to go. Okay? Let's do the next one. As soon as I see rad 2, I know I'm dealing with a 45, 45, 90. Because it's positive, I know it's in the first quadrant. I know that my ratio for a 45, 45, 90 is 1, 1, rad 2. Now I know it looks like that can be confusing, but I want you to look at 1 over rad 2. If I simplified that, that's rad 2 over 2, which is that. So I have to go back to my original ratio in order to get the answer. So I know that this is 45. Boom, that's one of my answers. Probably one that your calculator would have told you. But sine is dealing with opposite. So that opposite number has to be positive. If this represents adjacent, this represents opposite, and it has to be positive. If I did that over here, the opposite is down. That's negative. If I went left and down, that's negative. But if I go left and up, that's my opposite, positive. So that means that's the two places it's positive, negative 1, 1, rad 2. I know my reference angle is 45 degree. I reference the 180. It's in quadrant 2, so I go 180 minus 45 is 135. Now some of you go, how come it's not plus 180? Okay, so if I did delete plus 45, that's 225. But 225 tells me it's in this quadrant, and I know that's wrong. So let me show you. If I actually thought, let's say I thought it was 225. If I went the sine of 225, it gives me a negative value, but that's positive. If I go sine of 135, that gives me the positive value. If I go rad 2 divided by 2, all those values are exactly the same. Okay, let's go to the next one. As soon as I see rad 3, boom, 30, 60, 90. Okay, so I know since it's positive, it's in the first quadrant. Now rad 3 over 3 is not my ratio. 1 over rad 3 is my ratio, which means this number represents my opposite. Opposite 1. This number represents my adjacent. Rad 3, and then that's 2. Now remember, what's across from the 1? 30 degrees. Boom, quadrant 1. Now what I have to do is find one where no matter what, it's positive. If I go left negative and up positive, a negative over positive is a negative. If I go right positive and down negative, a positive over negative is a negative. But if I go left negative and down negative, a negative over negative gives me a positive. So I play the same game. My reference angle is 30 degrees. What's across from that 1? rad 3, 2. I go to my reference angle, and since I'm in the third quadrant, I add. Okay? Now I went a little bit quickly because I realized what I wanted you to do, and this will be on the test. There'll be a question that says, give me all of these answers in radian mode. If I ask you to give this in radian mode, you have to take those values, divide by 180, and simplify. Okay? So let me do this. You could do it in the calculator, but I think you're pretty good. 3 over 18 is 1 over 6. So you go pi over 6 because you need to make sure you show that in radian mode. 330 over 18, I can divide by 3, which is 11 over 6. There's my pi to show me radian. I might have gone a little fast for you, so let me show you what I mean. 330 divided by 180. It gives you a decimal answer. If you go second PRB, you get 1 5/6. You need to be able to transfer that 1 5/6 times plus is the same thing as 11 over 6. You can also use the fancy calculators because they'll do it better for you. Okay. 45 over 180, so 45 divided by 180. 0.25 I know is 1/4, but let's say I didn't know that. So then that answer is pi over 4. 135 divided by 180 is 0.75, which I know is 3/4, but just in case, 3 pi over 4. So that means your answer in degree mode, 135, your answer in radian, 3 pi over 4. Your answer in degree, your answer in radian. So you still have two solutions, but you're showing it to me in two different ways, like in two different languages. Same thing over here. Divide by 180. Divide by 180. And we know it's the same thing, so that's pi over 6. Divide by 6. 3. 7 over 6. So that's 7 pi over 6. Okay? Now that we got that out of the way, let's do the next one. Rad 2. As soon as I see rad 2, boom, a 45, 45, 90. Since it's negative, it cannot be in the first quadrant. So now I know at least one of them is going to be right. I do know that my adjacent value has to be negative. Adjacent is my x. That's negative. If I went this way, it's positive. So that one's out. And I have my two triangles. I know since it's a 45, 45, 90 because of the rad 2. This is 1, negative 1, negative 1, rad 2, rad 2. The great thing about a 45, 45, 90 is I don't have to guess. It's 45. So I take the 180. I subtract from 45. And I take the 180. And I add 45. And then I remember, sorry about that, to change it to radian mode. So I'm going to go 135 and move this over. 135 divided by 180. 0.75, second PRB. 3 pi over 4. Then I come over here. 225 divided by 180. Second PRB, which is 5 pi over 4. Okay. Last one. Oh no, there's two more, just kidding. I actually want to change this one. Instead of making it tan, let's make it sine. So I'm going to make the sine of negative 1. Okay? Now the problem with this one is that I know you want it to be over 1, but then that wouldn't work for a 1, 1 rad 2. So it's not a triangle, it's on the line. And if you remember, this is cosine and this is sine. That means I want the y value to be negative 1, so that has to be a 0. If I plot the point 0, negative 1, that hits the value at 270 degrees. So that is the instance where there is one answer. Then I have to put it in radian mode. Divide by 9, 3/2. Okay? All right. I actually think for the last one I'm going to change that and make it the inverse cosine of 0. So if I have the inverse cosine of 0, it's not a 30, 60, 90. It's not a 45, 45, 90. But what it reminds me of, cosine, sine. Now that means it could be 0, 1, but it could also be 0, negative 1. So it's 0, negative 1, and 0, 1, which has a value of 90 and 270. So 90 degrees is one of my answers, and 270 is another one. If you don't believe me, you'll take the cosine, the cosine of 270, and there's 0. You take the cosine of 90, and there's 0. Change it to radian mode, divide by 180. And that's pi over 2, and this one is 3 pi over 2. Hopefully that helped you out.